Okay. So guys, just before we begin, I wanted to give a trigger warning. Just owing to the kind of discussions that we'll be having today, we would be touching upon topics like abuse, violence, abusive relationships, and pain. So with that being said, let's just kind of get into it. So we'll just start off with like a little brief history of what e-collars are, how they came to be, all that. So e-collars basically came around in the 60s. They were invented as this means to kind of train hunting dogs. So back then you had like this huge clunky box that they would attach to the dog, which was either made of metal or wood, and it would deliver like this really strong shock. There was no way to really control how strong the shock could be, or it would just like give this really painful shock to the dog. And you had like this giant remote with a huge antenna that you would kind of use to control it. And because it was radio activated, back then e-collars kind of basically picked up interference from everything. So there's like another like remote nearby. If there's an aircraft flying too low, your collar is basically like shocking your dog. So that's kind of been like the basic principle of what an e-collar does. It delivers like this little painful stimulus to the dog. And since then, it's kind of evolved over the years in shape and form. And today you got like all these different types of e-collars, which all of you must be knowing. We've got collars, which of course are remote activated. You've got collars, which are sound activated. So the dog is barking, they kind of get activated. There are also certain collars which are like fence activated. So if a dog kind of steps out of a specific boundary, the dog gets like the stimulus from the e-collar. And sadly, they've also kind of been growing in popularity with a lot of trainers, specifically aversive and balanced trainers, kind of using them. Like today, I mean, anyone can just go on Amazon and just buy an e-collar without really like knowing what to do, and then just like slap it on the dog and kind of just start using it. But luckily, there has kind of been pushback from a lot of countries, specifically European countries, to kind of ban the use of e-collars on the grounds of animal welfare. There are actually a bunch of countries in Europe where the use of e-collars is banned. So countries like Germany, the Netherlands, France, Sweden, Denmark, and a whole bunch of them. Also some parts of Australia. And of course, the most recent one that was announced was the ban in UK, which is going to kind of come into effect from 2024. So kind of like when anything gets banned, you do have like a bunch of people who oppose this, right? So there have been like a vocal group of people who have come out with these arguments, saying that this is why e-collars should not be banned. E-collars are actually like good things. These are like the pros of e-collars. So kind of what we're going to do today is just like break down each of those arguments and just understand what is actually behind that. So hopefully by the end of this talk, the next time you guys like find someone who's trying to push an e-collar onto you, you have like these valid points to counter them with, right? So to start off with, a very popular kind of argument that people have with e-collars, especially when they're starting off with an e-collar, is that it's not that clunky box from the 60s anymore. E-collars are more sophisticated now. They don't deliver like a painful stimulus. What the dog is feeling isn't very painful. It's not very aversive. And really, when you like kind of come down to it, like the e-collar works because it's aversive. Like it doesn't matter whether it's like giving voltage to the dog, whether it's vibrating, whether it's making a noise, whatever it's doing, it has to be aversive, or the collar isn't going to work. Like if you're trying to get a behavior out of the dog and you say, if you do not sit, I'm going to shock you, or I'm going to keep shocking you till you sit. The shocking part of it has to be unpleasant enough that the dog wants it to stop. So no matter what it is, whether it's a vibration, whether it's a beat, it has to be unpleasant enough. It has to have a negative kind of impact on the dog to, be able to work, basically. So saying that, it's a toned down version. It doesn't do electricity, it does other things that kind of really doesn't hold ground because it still is an aversive tool, right? And you also got like people who say things like, I tried the e-collar on myself. I'm using it on the lowest setting. I put it on myself first before kind of using it on the dog. So, I know that it's not painful. I know that it's not the thing. And the thing about that is like, no matter what someone is experiencing with the e-collar, no matter what they feel about it, it has absolutely nothing to do with what the dog is going to experience it. Because the thing is with pain and like discomfort, fear, these feelings are kind of like subjective, right? Like what you feel is like for yourself. No one can really tell you how to what feelings you're gonna experience. So if I can give you a bit of a like funny example, like up until some time ago, I used to be terrified of butterflies. Okay, this is going to sound really funny, but like if they're far away, I'm okay with it. But like when they come near me, and those people who like get butterflies to walk on their hands, or like they hold them, I'm just like, get it off, get it off, get it off. It's so aversive to me. And like any normal person is going to be like, it's a butterfly. Why are you so scared of it? But to me, the reaction that I'm feeling, that's like a valid reaction. The fear, the pain, the discomfort that I feel, or what the dog feels, it's still valid to the dog. It's subjective to the dog, and we none of us can tell what whether the tool that we're using is aversive to the dog or not, because it basically ultimately depends on the dog. And really coming back to the previous point, if it wasn't painful, if it wasn't aversive, if it wasn't something that the dog did not like, he's not gonna respond to the e-collar. It's not like, when the dog goes off leash, the e-collar is magically whispering in his ear, hey, come back when the person presses the button. It's working because it's causing discomfort and pain. And the off-leash thing is like another argument that's like really popular. So I'm gonna let Sulbhi take that.
Yeah, thanks, Ahana. I think just building off of what Ahana shared, I think another argument made for the use of e-collars is that it allows dogs freedom when they're off leash. And again, I find that that's very, very problematic, right? Because if we had to break it down into a couple of different things, I think, when we put our dogs in situations where they are supposed to be off leash or expected to be off leash, I think there are lots of different things to consider. And this is also really where I think some of the Barks principles and ways sort of come into being. And so some of them is, one is what is your dog's own ability to sort of regulate themselves and be responsive to you when they are in an outdoor environment, right? If they aren't able to respond to you, if they aren't able to regulate themselves, then keeping them off leash or creating that space again is something to question, right? I think the second thing to think about is what is the quality of this outdoor environment where we are letting our dogs be off leash, right? If it is filled with triggers, if it is overstimulating to our dog, then is that the right environment for our dog to be in to begin with? And so, why would we in the first place even put our dog in an environment like that, right? I think the other aspect to consider is also just the ability, just the trust and responsive in your relationship with your dog, right? At the end of the day, if I am outdoors with my dog and I need to sort of call my dog back to me because I feel like something is unsafe or my dog's moved away really far away, and my dog's not responding to me, or I don't trust my dog enough to be outdoors, then I think, again, that's something for us to question, right? I think the use of an equipment does not solve for those things. I think when we think about our dogs being off leash, for most part, we want them to have that off leash experience so that they have freedom, so that they have agency to move around as much as they want, right? But is it really freedom if there is the probability of being shocked? Is there really freedom if there's probability of experiencing pain, right? Or are we just creating this sort of illusion of freedom in some way or the other? And I think the example that really comes to mind is, with one of my own dogs, Mutton, who's a pit bull type dog, and again, well, stereotypically a dog that would perhaps be subjected to this kind of equipment. And she tends to find cattle very, very triggering, to the point that if they're very close, she can get very, very defensive. And so I think that the thing that I think about is, would I, for example, put her in a situation where she's around her trigger, leave her off leash, and use the collar to give her freedom? Or would I just not put her in a situation like that and reduce the amount of stress and challenge that she's experiencing, right? And so I think there are lots of things to sort of unpack and work through as we figure out how to leave our dogs off leash. And I don't think that an e-collar is the tool to help you do that, right? And again, I think coming back to, I think the why becomes really important, right? What is this off-leash experience that we want to provide for our dogs? What is the benefit of that? What are we trying to create for them? And does using the e-collar in any which way actually help us achieve that? So I think that's definitely something to think about. I think the other argument that also comes up quite often in support of the e-collar is that it's a remote form of punishment, which means that the punishment is not really associated with the owner or caregiver, right? So because I'm using a certain equipment from afar, the dog doesn't necessarily associate it being punitive with the owner. And again, it's extremely problematic, right? Because I mean, I think of a dog experiencing this shock, this pain, this vibration, and not knowing where it's coming from, right? And that's confusing, and that's scary, and that's stressful. And I think there's something to be also said in the sense of, if I am close to my human being, I would turn to my human being for support. I would turn to my human being to step in and stop this, right? But when the human sort of throws their hands up in the air and says, listen, this is remote form of punishment, there is no connection making that this dog is doing, there's something, again, very, very problematic about that, right? So I think, again, it is really about, is the e-collar for the dog then, or is it really to preserve one's own sense of, listen, I'm out of this and I have nothing to do with this, right? And if that is the situation, then this conversation will take a very different direction, right? But I think it also comes down to that sense of ethics, and again, we're going to talk a lot about the ethics in today's conversation. I think, are you comfortable, again, even being a bystander to inflicting pain or violence to your dog, right? And I think if I had to get really vulnerable and share, I remember a couple of incidents when, I would get, beaten up a little bit by my mother. And I know that every adult who stood by and watched, I hold a grudge against them, right? I think they had an opportunity to step in and save me or come in and intervene in some way, and they didn't. And I don't think I don't think watching as a bystander or absolving yourself of that responsibility of stepping in does much, again, to your relationship, right? Sindoor, you have your hand up. Yeah.
Why don't you finish your points, and then I finally figured out how to put my hand up. So I decided to do it, but why don't you finish your point, and then, Rukmini.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I was just sort of moving towards the closing of this, right? Which is, again, if you are using this with the excuse that it is a remote form of punishment that does not allow this association between my dog and I, then I think your definition of what that relationship needs a lot of change, right? I think you need to think a little bit more deeper about what is the kind of real relationship you want to build with your dog. And so that's really where my closing thought was. Yeah. Sindoor, over to you.
Great. So I think if anybody has heard these kind of arguments, or sort of have counter arguments that you've heard to these, I think you should definitely put it in the chat, because we can pick up some of those. And I think there are some interesting points in the chat already. But listening to you guys talk, should be listening to you talk, the number of contradictions in these arguments is just mind-blowing, right? So on one hand, we're saying, hey, it's not that aversive. And on the other hand, we're saying, let's put it remote so that it's not associated with us. Why don't you want it to be associated with you? If it's not that aversive, and if it's such a wonderful thing, then you want it to be associated with you. Why are you distancing yourself from it? What is the need for that distance? That need clearly suggests that there is something terribly, wrong with it. There's something, it's not just sort of a mildly aversive, me saying, I don't like you doing this, and the dog, pouting and walking away. And then, the relationship really doesn't damage. The relationship is damaging. And that's really why you're kind of distancing yourself that much from it. And the other thing is, again, the sort of complete disconnect in the idea of freedom. I mean, the last I do have my dogs off leash quite a bit, and when Nishi was around, we would go to the Swarga, the coffee estates, 100 acres, large place. This place also about 1,000 acres here, and Chiru gets off leash. If Nishi were worried or Chiru were worried, if I step here, will this hurt me? If I step here, will that hurt me? If I do this, will it hurt me? And that way, if it's on a remote control, it's not even any fence, right? It's a remote control, which means that you don't know which direction you go. This is going to hurt you. What kind of a freedom is that? Is that really what we call freedom? If you're constantly, it's like walking in a place where there are landmines. I don't know how that would be considered freedom or something that you want to give to your dog. That nature of freedom, it's just a weird word to be used in this situation, but this is the experience you want to give to your dog and you're advocating for it. It's just warped. It's inconsistent. You're not thinking through it. You're not discussing through it. It feels like you're using nice rosy words to cover up for something that deep down is nasty. I'm sorry, I'm just using really strong words, but it's a lot of sugarcoating BS. To put it really simply, it's just BS that's being sugarcoated. I have no other way to say this. I think I don't blame people who fall for the arguments the first few times because it sounds very, it sounds well articulated. It sounds like, hey, it's an equipment that's designed for dogs. So it should be specialized. It should be right for them. Everybody uses it. It makes sense. It gives my dog freedom. And it's so smart. It distances me from. So it sounds like very interesting arguments for a naive person who's probably hearing it for the first few times. But if you have discussed about it enough with enough set of people, you should be able to start seeing through those arguments to see that it doesn't make sense. And if you have anything up here, it should be beginning to say, okay, this is not adding up. And you should be, I think if you're holding on to the argument, despite that, you're either very obstinate or somewhere you're not able to do some logical thinking. That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, thanks, Indur. I think just building off of, some of these arguments again, I think the off-leash argument and even the remote, the distance from punishment again can seem slightly more rigorous arguments to make. But I know that one of the more common ones has just been that it facilitates very rapid suppression of behavior. So I'm going to let Saujanya take that and respond to that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Surabhi, Sindur, and Ahana for setting it up for now. We do hear a lot about, and Richard Polsky has mentioned this even in his paper about how one of the advantages of shock collar is rapid suppression of behavior. And sure, it might be, useful in rapid suppression, but does it really solve the issue that the dog is going through, right? And there are a lot of situations in which shock collars are usually used, right? Biting, nipping, barking, escaping off of certain boundaries and, chasing. But I would wonder whether we are able to go at the underlying reasons why the dogs are getting to any of these behaviors, right? Not just the ones that I listed, but any behaviors that they tend to exhibit, because let's face it, all of these behaviors, whether it is desirable, undesirable, good or bad, all kinds of labels aside, it's information for us to kind of be able to read what is going on with our dogs. And if your dog is overwhelmed, overstimulated, unable to process and be emotionally regulated, like how Ahana and Surabhi mentioned, or they're not able to kind of make sound cognitive decisions, then is it even the right situation for them? And it seems like shock collars or basically any aversive or any technique that is used to kind of suppress behavior and is used to mask the behaviors seems like a quick, way to not want to get into the details of what's going on with our dogs, right? And we see this a lot like I've been researching a little bit about obviously gentle parenting, but also about neurodiversity, and we read a lot about how um, individuals tend to kind of start masking, start behaving in the way that is socially acceptable, because social structures reward social acceptable behaviors. And that doesn't mean one is feeling safe. That doesn't mean one is feeling at their emotional best or cognitive best, or they are able to access safe spaces for themselves, or able to even express how they are feeling. So I would obviously question whether rapid suppression is really an advantage at all in this situation. And I would obviously go back and think about, if I am facing these behaviors, if my dogs are exhibiting these behaviors of dysregulation or unhealthy or maladaptive behaviors, then what is going on, one with their surroundings, their environment, my relationship with them, and everything that kind of affects behavior. So that is what I would probably think about when someone says rapid suppression. But the other question is, if something is working quickly and it's a quick fix, then it's more likely that it's not a sustainable solution in the long term, right? So I think I would really question the ideas of rapid and suppression both put together in this context, right? The other obvious, and I think the last one that I would bring up in terms of arguments that people make for the shock collars and e-collars, is that, don't you think I love my dog? I am only using e-collars to kind of manage, the situations that I end up facing with my dog. And I want to reiterate that we will be going through trigger warnings here, abusive relationships, towards animals, abuse towards children, all kinds of things. So just warning before we get into this conversation, right? So I have been deep diving on this topic a lot, and I've gone down like all kinds of rabbit holes. But to me, I think this is a layered conversation, because, and I was having this conversation with Surabhi as well, that it's a misconception, and we are culturally raised to believe that love and abuse are mutually exclusive. They cannot exist together. But the more you think about it, it's not that there is absence of love where there is abuse. And we see this a lot in relationships that are intimate partner relationships. We see this in parent-child relationships, and we see that an excuse is given that I love this XYZ person, but all I want to do is they behave in the way that is acceptable to me, right? And we see that love, toxic love, kind of manifests in coercion, control, dominance, the need for submissive behaviors from the other individual, the need for yeah. So I think these are the kind of conversations that we seem to hear. And I feel like when we talk about love, we also probably need to have conversations around what is healthy and safe connection, because if we are saying love and abuse can coexist, then what really is healthy and safe connection that we're talking about? So beyond love, there has to be respect, there has to be support, there has to be safe space, there has to be agency, there has to be ability to make choices, there has to be body autonomy. And if our dogs are not getting a lot of this, and you just say that I love my dog and I'm just managing these situations, while exhibiting them to lack of freedom, lack of choices, no body autonomy, no safe spaces, then it might be worth thinking about what really is toxic relationships here, and whether our dogs are actually getting access to safe and healthy connection with the humans around them. So that would be a little bit on what we see in terms of abuse. And I think a great book that I did access to be able to kind of have this conversation is Do You Feel Safe at Home by Gauri Ale. And I think there is a lot of conversation, and you'll see a lot of similarity between abusive intimate partner relationships, child abuse and animal abuse. And it's not surprising that that where there is one, there is also another. There's also studies around that as well. So I think it's good to go, I mean, not good, but worth going down that road and wondering whether this is also applicable when we have conversations around human and animal. And I also feel like we also need to recognize that there is a imbalance in power here in equation, because dogs do rely on us, especially companion animals living in our household, accessing the food we give them, accessing the space we give them, accessing the kind of medical care and attention we give them. There is an imbalance of power, and if we are exercising that power and actually exercising the control on them, then we are tending to go towards the toxic sides of relationships, and I think it's worth thinking about that as well. Now, moving on to conversations that we have heard arguments for the ban, which is basically why we shouldn't be using e-collars, and I think we all want to expand a little bit on that, and I'll touch upon a couple of them, and then I'll again pass it over to Surabhi after this. So one obvious thing that I wanted to point out is the emotional pain angle that, of course, physical pain, and we have touched upon it, Ahana has touched upon it, Surabhi has touched upon it, but there's also a huge aspect of emotional pain. And when I say emotional pain, it could be fear, confusion, lack of safe, support. It could be lack of agency, lack of choice. All of this falls under emotional pain. And there are studies that have shown that the brain regions that light up during physical pain are also similar to what lights up during emotional pain, which means that we experience emotional pains in similar and sometimes even far more intensely in comparison to physical pain. So it's not just worth looking at physical pain, but also what our dogs are emotionally going through, the helplessness of the entire situation, the fact that they can't reach out and find support in their humans, that the fact that they are not able to make choices that seem like they need to make in that moment, given their entire situation. It feels like extremely painful in that situation. So I wonder if we want to even think about emotional pain while also giving enough merit to the physical pain conversations that we did have. And finally, there is also a question of, if dogs are feeling or experiencing this extreme physical and emotional pain, why do they still attached to the humans that they're around? Why do they still respond and be responsive to the humans around them? And I think one obvious reason that we might think of is the fact that there are only these humans that the dog can access, and they rely heavily on these humans to care for them and for their survival. But also the fact that dogs are wired to be so hugely attached to humans. In fact, I think I can read this one out if I find the statement, which was Hart in a paper in 1995 claims that dogs display an inexhaustible willingness to form and sustain partnerships with humans, which means that irrespective of the kind of emotional pain, physical pain that they are experiencing, and this we have seen in dog fighting, or dogs being used for really fatal kind of jobs. They still work for humans. They still want to please their humans. They still want to access that support from the humans. So I feel like while acknowledging that they are looking for their caregivers, their human attachment figures to help them out in situations, it doesn't mean that they're not feeling the pain, the physical pain and the emotional pain that they are experiencing through aversive techniques. Of course, we're talking about shock collars here, but I think it does extend to all kinds of aversives that we, look around us. And again, this is not like all dogs respond in the same way, right? Like, it doesn't mean that every dog that has been, subjected to aversive will respond in the same way. So there are dogs who could, lose their, trust and have poor relationship with their owners. And I think Surabhi can take this up going forward from here.
Thanks, Sajanya. And again, I think you've really touched upon pretty much everything. So I think I'm going to talk about, just the relationship with owners on multiple different levels, right? And I think what Sajanya has really spoken about is to think about what is the kind of relationship we want to have with our dogs. And then do we want to have a relationship that's based on control and fear and this extensive power dynamic, or do we want to build a relationship that's based on safety and connection and kindness and empathy, right? And if the answer to the question is really the first one, then the whole point of this conversation is pretty moot. But I think if the answer to the question, if the answer is yes to the second one, then of course there's so much more potential to sort of think about that. But I think at a very fundamental level, and again, I want to sort of shift the impact to perhaps what the dog experiences in relationships like these, right? And again, when we look at examples of children, specifically children growing up in violent homes, in growing up in homes where abuse has been prevalent, I think we find that there is a certain way that they respond to unpredictability. And there is an incredible amount of research, right, that's available. And again, we'll share papers on how predictability becomes a huge factor, right, to exercise agency, to feel safe, to feel comfortable. And the lack of that can be extremely stressful, right? It is literally your body operating in this whole fight or flight mode constantly, right? And that kind of stress is incredible, to the point that even, something as simple as a glass falling can sort of set such big reactions, right? And I think that's something for us to again think about in terms of, what is the state of living for another being that we're sharing our homes with, where they experience such levels of unpredictability that they don't know when they're going to be shocked, they don't know when they're going to experience this kind of pain, and then also not having the comfort of knowing that they can actually reach out to this human and have them alleviate them of this pain, right? So I think that there's a huge emotional impact on the physical, emotional, behavioral well-being of the dog in that context right there. And I think that also leads to like the other argument, which is for the ban of these collars, which is the relationship between stress and disease, right? And this is really what we spend so much time talking about at Barks again. One, it starts off as, the shocks can start off as micro stressors, but very quickly when done at frequency, when done in volume, they become chronic stress. And the impact of chronic stress on the body is like a dominoes effect, right? We see sleep getting affected, we see immunity getting affected, we see digestion getting affected, we see so many different things, just the whole physical body responding to this kind of stress, right? And that leads to just a host of complicated issues. And we've seen this to be true for even humans, right? And unfortunately, I think so many of us who live in very urban, fast-paced cities experience chronic stress, experience voluminous micro stressors, and we struggle day in and day out. And this is just a whole other stress of not knowing or of anticipating like this pain, and not being able to do anything to control that, not having any agency around that, right? And of course, then there are, and I find myself, I think, just like oscillating through these arguments between macro level impact and also like micro level impact. And I know that the use of the words macro and micro are very like deceptive because it's impact nevertheless. But I feel like, I was going through an argument for the ban, and I think a paper sort of talked about how there have been reports of physical lesions on dogs as well because of the skin type could be different because of the levels of moisture. Some dogs have reported to have ongoing skin irritation, some have had contact necrosis. And I look at this, and then I also look at the overall impact on physical health and emotional health, and it's just so much, and all because we're choosing to use a certain kind of equipment versus investing in a relationship with our dog, versus investing in trying and understanding what's going on and how can we support our dog much better. And so I know that, Sindhura and Ahana are going to talk a little bit more about, just the impact on welfare and just overall well-being and ethics of this. And Sindhur, you have your hand up, so you can respond to some of the thoughts. And yeah.
Yeah. So I did want to comment on some of the things that Saujanya said, right? Yeah, the idea of rapid suppression and the idea of love. And to me, these two are interesting because they kind of tie back to some of these themes that I bring up repeatedly, especially with animals. Is one of the things that has been so hugely influential with the way we have been treating animals is the idea that was proposed by Descartes a long time ago. The idea that they are machines, they are automatons, we have to look at them as machines. And though it has been years and we have had so many people kind of provide counter arguments to that, starting from the time of Descartes all the way down now to cognitive ethologists and MRI that shows that they experience emotions, and concepts work, and like all of that. And despite that, we come back to this, in our hearts we hold on to this idea that they are machines, and so we continue to treat them like machines. And so when we talk about suppression as if they are machines, and this is again you see this so heavily in AI and machine learning and things like that, which is, you have the wrong output, you just provide the right consequences to it and the output would stop. What happens to the rest of the being? What happens to the rest of the emotions? What happens to everything else that's going on? It's so, how can we look at something so myopically, like just look at one behavior and say I will stop that and have no consequences? You're going to have no consequences on the rest of this individual in terms of how else will they cope with what's going on? What drove into that? And similarly, if you look at the idea of love, especially of animals, right? And I've seen this with horses, I've seen this with dogs. A lot of people who claim to love their animal are also looking at this again like an automaton. Like, I have a Bentley and I have a prize horse and I have a fabulous dog, right? Like I remember having a client who came in that way, and he's like, I bought my dog from the most expensive, so I have this really fancy golden retriever and a very fancy something else from the perfect breeder. And he had a very interesting question for me. He said he listened to all the jibber jabber that I had to say, nothing went in, because in his mind, fancy Bentley, right? That's all that dog is. So he asks me, how can I teach my dog to sleep on his bed? And I said, let him sleep wherever he wants to. What's the problem? No, he goes and sleeps on the floor. Yeah, dude, you have a husky and a golden, and this is India. He's feeling hot. He's sleeping on the ground because he's trying to regulate temperature. Let him do that. No, he's going to have calluses and his coat is going to look ugly. You see? He's looking at it like a maintenance mode, how the dog should look, not calluses, should look perfect. And then eventually at the end, I was trying to figure out, why did he even come to me? And I realized at that time that he was again looking at it, like taking the car to the best service station, something like that, so he had kind of brought the dog to me. But there was no intent in helping the dog. It was just check mark. Best groomer, best bed, best this. And I think these ideas again go back to that, which is, why do we believe so strongly that they are just machines when there is overwhelming evidence that that's not the case? And the danger of some belief of that kind is that and they continue to ask for proof, right? Where is proof that they feel pain? Where is proof that you remember I was mentioning the Ray Gator's book, where it said that when you ask for proof, you already are not convinced. There's no point. There's no point in having this conversation, because to me, if there is an inkling that something could hurt my dog, my loved ones, my friends, my students, if there's an inkling that it could hurt, my first step is to say, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to figure out the details, and then come back to do I really need to do this? I just I don't need proof. You don't need to prove to me. If I see on your faces when I talk to somebody who I love, if I see on your face that I possibly may be hurting them, I want to take a step back. So when they're asking for proof, I don't think they want to be convinced about it. I think they're trying to find reasons for not convincing themselves about it. The other thing I wanted to mention is when we spoke about why dogs go back to abusive human beings. And I think that has to do with survival, because if you look at street dogs, right, street dogs are constantly subjected to some form of pain due to humans or human artifacts, right? Car, abuse, hitting, something or the other. They do get hurt. We know this. And it's not now, it's through history. For the 100,000 years that they have been around us, humans are notorious for hurting animals throughout history, right? And I think the reason dogs have survived is their resilience to say, I'll forget it, I'll come back, I'll come back. How many street dogs do we know who have been hurt by human beings, but still learn to come back because their survival depends on forgiving us? And that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking if you think about it, that their survival depends on forgiving us and learning to trust us again. And we are just abusing that left, right, and center. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that they are wired that way. And for those of us who want to be sensitive towards it, we can't wait for that consequence where the dog finally says, I've had enough. We can't wait for that. We shouldn't be waiting for that one way or the other. But, if you're going to wait for that kind of a feedback, I think, yeah, we're getting into very dark territory. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out, when we spoke about sort of it leading to health issues lead to behavioral issues, them being wired up all the time, which can lead to kind of reactivity. And look at the vicious cycle that they're stuck in. So they're doing this, their health goes for a toss, their emotions go for a toss, they are reactive, and they say, oh, we need to this, see, I told you, this is a dog that needs this. And they're upping the ante till the dog has no choice but to shut down fully. Till that time, the ante is upping. So it's a cycle that we are getting ourselves into, and I don't think there's a way out of that. And so it's a really slippery slope. Yeah, those are the things I wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sindoor. And I think that's a really good segue into, I think, just talking, overall about, I think, the impact on just dog well-being and welfare. And so, Ahana,
Yeah,
do you want to jump in?
Sorry, do you also want to take some of the questions, Surabhi, at some point?
Yeah. So should we just let, I mean, I think, Ahana, you take yours, you do your piece, and then we can come back to some of the questions that come in. Yeah.
Cool. So, kind of just talking about behavior, just to kind of go back to what Saujanya had said earlier, how the e-collar is basically suppressing behavior rapidly. So the thing is, all behavior that the dog is exhibiting is some form of communication. Behind the behavior, there's like a particular need that the dog is kind of trying to fulfill, right? By expressing that behavior, whether it's like barking, digging, walking around, whatever it is. And when you're suppressing the behavior, you're kind of like stopping the dog from doing that particular thing. But what you're not doing is you're not addressing the need underneath it. So the need of the dog to do dog things still exists. So while you are able to kind of control the behavior in this one place, there's a very likely chance that you're going to start seeing this behavior coming out in other places. And like Surbi, like Sindoor have mentioned, this is a dog who's under so much stress all the time. It's constantly wired up. So there's a lot of like stressful kind of feelings in the dog, which are going to kind of manifest in other forms of behavior. So whether you see like destructive behavior, or destroying furniture, destroying the house, and if they're not allowed to do that, also if they're like just like constantly punished, they might turn it onto themselves. You'll see self harm, like constant licking, and chewing on their limbs, which is also like when they're in pain, they're gonna chew on their limbs. So really, just by like kind of trying to control one behavior, you kind of just like open up this box to like a whole other bunch of behaviors. And I also think like when you are just kind of like indiscriminately shutting down like different things that the dog is doing, this becomes dangerous like at a point, right? Like when dogs use behavioral signals, for example, they have distance creating signals when they're growling at you or barking at you. That's the dog's way to kind of tell you, step back. I don't want to like fight you right now. I just want you to like move away from me. But if instead the person is like, you're growling at me, you're barking at me, I'm gonna like zap you and like shut that down. What's happening is that dog's kind of like learning like these behaviors have this communication has no effect. There's no point in me trying to even give out this signal. So the dog is essentially just gonna kind of escalate to the next level, which is the next time it's put in this threatening situation, he's just gonna directly go in for the bite. So kind of, I think that's something we need to think about. Like, what are we kind of just trying to put a band-aid and solve just like the upper level of behaviors without really like looking into like what's going on underneath. And another point which I also saw like a lot of the commenters had brought up as well is an issue of redirection. So like Surbi said, when you're using an e-collar, you got this distance from the dog. The dog is not associating you with this like pain or this sudden jolt that he's getting, right? So what is the dog going to associate it with? Most likely the dog is going to see what's in his immediate surroundings and kind of associate that with this really negative feeling that he's feeling. So, if you jolt your dog when he's like, maybe interacting with another dog or interacting with a human, there is a very good chance of you building this like very negative association. That the dog has a very negative association of that other person. So on an immediate basis, this might actually end up with the dog just keep attacking and lunging. And there have actually been cases like this where, when someone uses an e-collar, the dog immediately like turns its aggression towards whoever is closest. On a long-term basis, you also risk the dog developing like a lot of fear and a lot of insecurity and just, not being able to like cope with who he was coping earlier before, he kind of got zapped. And another thing we want to talk about is also when you use an e-collar to kind of teach the dog, what exactly is the dog learning? How exactly is the dog learning? Because this is a dog who is in like so much stress. He's constantly just like in this very like negative and scary state of mind. And when your brain is kind of so scared of everything, it's not going to be able to learn, right? Like think about I mean, I don't know how many of you experience this. I have experienced this. When you're in a classroom and your teacher calls on you and she's like, what is the answer to this question? And you're like, I have no idea. And the teacher is just like, bearing down on you, like, you tell me the answer right now. And you're just like freaking out. You're not gonna learn anything in that moment. You're just gonna either shut down fully, just stare blankly, or just figure out how to get out of that situation. So that's kind of like the mind space that the dog is in when you're trying to teach him something or train him into some behavior, which means the way he's able to learn something is just he's just not able to learn something fast enough, right? And what happens then? Then the thing is you're asking the dog like to sit or to come, and the dog is not able to like understand or not able to respond in a timely manner. And usually the solution to this is you amp up the dial on the e-collar because he's not listening at this level. You keep kind of just increasing the intensity till you get some sort of reaction from the dog. And when you do get a reaction, when the punishment works, what happens is that kind of acts as a positive reinforcement for the punisher. So it's a little dark, but like when someone's punishing, when you're kind of meting out the force and you see that it's got an effect, it kind of subconsciously you kind of get that thing that if I increase the force, I am gonna get the behavior. And so like the dog is in this state where they're already freaking out, they're not able to understand what's happening, and the person is just constantly increasing the force, and at that point it really just becomes like an animal welfare issue, right? At that point, I think the person needs to step back and really ask themselves, like, is what have I become? Like, who is this the person I am? Someone who's willing to like knowingly inflict harm on this animal who is totally dependent on me just so that I can get behavior that is convenient to me, yeah. Sindhu, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think these are all great points. Actually, I was kind of also when we're talking about who I am and it's these fundamental questions, right? So two of the comments that were sent in, one was about, okay, with the ban coming in, there are going to be a lot more people kind of moving to, wanting to move to or kind of forced to move to positive ways or looking for other ways to do it. And I don't know if they're going to move to positive ways, right? So that's an interesting one there. And I think there was also another one on how this is used to demonstrate that look how obedient my dog is, and show that I'm a good trainer. To show that, look how my dog obeys. And I think in between those two comments, there's a fundamental issue, right? Which is fundamentally, if the conversation doesn't change, which is that we're not looking for an obedient dog, this is not really what, because that's what they keep coming back to, which is, well, what other method is more effective? It's not about what is a more effective method. It's not about putting an alternative that is equally effective. And I see a lot of arguments about that. I can train tigers, I can train dinosaurs, I can train whatever with positive methods. But that's really not the point, because at the end of the day, all of those are all still looking at them as machines, needing them to be very compliant, judging them as good only if they are 100% compliant, and judging people as responsible only if they have a 100% compliant animal that behaves a certain way. And I think unless that conversation changes, a person who is used to the idea of saying that this is the way I go about getting my way, and that's an ethics issue, right? That is your ethics. If you are used to the idea that I'm going to demand this and I'm going to get it, and that tool has been taken away, and you haven't been equipped with not another way to get it, but to actually have that dialogue. Why are you not getting it? Why do you think you deserve it? Why is the animal doing it? Can we make this not about you for once and about the animal? If that conversation doesn't happen, I don't know. We're just going to have a new demon, replace the old one. I don't see that as a transition into a R plus space or a positive space or a non-training space. I think it's just going to lead to frustration. I don't know where it is going to go, but at least I think it's sending the right message to people who are on the fence and don't know about this, to say, okay, this seems to be a banned tool, so maybe I won't get on that bandwagon. So for those who haven't gotten on the bandwagon, maybe this is the right messaging. But for trainers who have been there, I'm kind of feeling uneasy about where they might go. That was kind of on my mind.
Yeah. All right. So should we just go through some of the comments, questions? If anybody has a comment or a question that we can respond to, then we can definitely do that. We have about 1 minute actually. So not too much time there, but of course, if somebody wants to sort of add something. Actually, Sindhu, when you were talking, I'm just going to quickly add, it was very, very hard to ignore the parallel with how women were and continue to be expected to behave, right? Compliant, submissive, quiet, without agency, right? And again, it's just reeks of, toxic masculinity and patriarchy. And I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was something that Gloria Steinem had said, that well-behaved girls don't make history or something like that. And I think it feels very relevant to just this idea of what acceptable behavior with dogs is as well. Okay. Are there any studies know about the age structure of who is using aversive methods, love obedience in dogs? I think that there may be a connection about educational system in different countries, which kind of children, citizens we want to go in our state, obedient ones which follow reflecting of free-thinking humans. No.
No, I haven't. My head has been at communication right now, so I haven't really been looking at aversive trainers. I think this would need a bit more of like a ethnographic study. So I don't know if there's one. Saujanya, you guys have been deep diving into the papers, right? Did you see anything of this nature?
No, I don't think. I mean, at least not really. Yeah, I think we saw more on the pros and the cons of aversive versus positive, but I don't think we found something around very specifically around the age structure.
Age, and what would also be interesting, I think, is culture, right?
Yeah.
the different cultures, what are the underlying beliefs about animals and things like that. And I would suspect it would be a very anthrozoology kind of a paper, because that's is so in that area. So let me check with my classmates to see if there's anything. I doubt there is, but I think it's a ripe place for us to do a study. And I'm looking at very specifically some people out here. We have to do this.
I did see a paper about perceptions towards dogs in some countries. I'll try and dig that up and see if that kind of goes towards what is being asked here. I did come across something of that sort while in conversation about aversive and yeah, I'll find that and then I'll probably share it if I find that and then it's relevant.
Yeah, let's do a commentary on that and share it, because it'll be interesting. Because even when we talk about perception towards dogs, it is what aspect of perception are we looking at, right? There is that nuanced question to ask. So yeah, it'll be interesting to actually do a commentary on it and then share that. I think there was a comment that came in. How punishment is normalized. Okay, yeah. That's a very interesting one on how we have really normalized punishment across so many cultures, children, women, animals. And this is the intersectionality, right? This is what we keep talking about when we talk about intersectionality. Children, women, and animals. And of course, there are other marginalized groups, but I think these are like three large groups where we see these conversations come over and over. One last thing that I did want to add is, I think I have seen a lot of people also argue that we don't shock them all the time. It's only during training. And then after that, all we need to do is, just a lowest setting, a buzz, a reminder. And again, the discrepancy in the argument is so evident. Why is a gentle reminder working so effectively? Because it's the extraordinary fear of what is going to come next. You remember what happened last time, and that was so terrifying that you don't want to even dream of doing this again, right? And when I say it this way, I'm saying it this way because this was uttered to me as a child. This, where a stick was kept on the table, and that was enough to make me want to pee. Right? Because that stick meant I know what's coming next, and it is so terrifying that you don't really have to hit me. You just have to keep it on the table. And the emotional upheaval of that, at least in terms of the long-term impact of stress, micro stressors, all of that, it's bang on right up there. And the book that Gauri talks about as well with domestic abuse as well is so many women who say, just get done with the beating because I cannot continue to deal with this. You know what's going to come. That phase of walking on ice till the beating happens is so stressful that you'd rather take the physical beating than actually wait for this thing to happen. So yeah, and that is also where emotional pain can be more painful than physical pain. Okay, we're out of time, guys. How did this time go so quickly?
Okay, cool. So, all right. So I think just a couple of things before we leave. First things first, thank you so much for just being here and, sharing your comments. I think just filling in the AMA with lots of thoughts as well. Again, given time, it's very difficult to get everybody to sort of talk and unmute themselves, but that's really what the chat box is for, and hopefully we covered as many voices as possible. Just a few parting thoughts. Again, we would love for you to sort of use the WhatsApp group to share, just ideas, thoughts, insights, anything that really resonated with you about today's discussion. The group is going to be open till tomorrow. And then, we will sort of reach out to you as well for ideas of what else you'd like for us to talk about. And, any other feedback that comes to mind. We'll share all of those links. I've already made a note of the fact that we're going to share a couple of papers with you, especially the ones that we found as we were sort of prepping for today's discussion. And yeah, I think two things, right, Saujanya? I think you want to talk about the Facebook group and then quickly close.
Yeah. So we have started a Facebook group and we'll soon share the link so that you can join there as well. We want to kind of cover places where, you know, you are going to be there mostly and be able to engage with us. So I think WhatsApp group, and then we have emails, and now we have Facebook group as well. We also have our own email ID now, so you can reach out for any kind of, you know, questions, you know, conversations, or engaging with us from your end. We'll share that as well. And yeah, I think that's about it. Anything else, Surabhi?
Yeah. So for those of you who are actually looking to figure out how to work with dogs that doesn't involve these kind of terrible things, and what it is that we do at Barks, you can reach out to Surbi and Saujanya. They do these free discovery calls as well. So if you're really brand new to this idea, then those are some good places to see if you can incorporate more gentle methods into your life. But if you're already a bit more familiar and want to deep dive a bit more, then C101 is a pretty a little bit more extensive course that you can do as well. And don't forget, we have our library up. So there's a lot of resources that we have put there, so you can read, watch, and things like that. Lots and lots of videos and articles up there as well. And Sajjanya and Surabhi have also been writing blogs. So I'm going to ask them to remind them to share it on the group with you guys. Please give them feedback. Let them know what you want to hear from them. And so we will engage a bit more with you on this.
Yep, that covers it all. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. It was lovely to see you. Have a great night, evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And we will see you soon again.